A wealthy businessman, out of pity, handed the keys to an old countryside house to a street orphan. When he returned 6 months later, he froze in shock. Dear friends, before we continue, tell us where in the world you're watching from and how old you are. Enjoy the story. Stop. Who's there? The shadow of a guard flickered by the gate, and Raven pressed herself against the brick wall, holding her breath. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like its echo filled the entire orphanage yard. Just one more second, and the beam of his flashlight swept dangerously close to her feet. Must have imagined it, the guard muttered, yawning as he walked back to his booth. Raven didn't exhale until half a minute later, when the door shut behind him. A thin 12-year-old girl with dark hair tied into a tight ponytail slipped along the fence toward a small hole only the kids knew about but never told the adults. The narrow gap between the concrete slabs, widened over the years by generations of orphans, was the last gate to freedom. Squeezing through, she ran without looking back. The backpack bounced against her back in rhythm with her steps. Everything she owned now fit inside that worn-out synthetic bag. The city slept. A few lonely streetlights cast pale circles on the empty roads. The air was heavy and sticky after the rain, making it hard to breathe, but Raven didn't slow down. Run, 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 pounded in her head. She glanced back only once, to see Orphanage number 7, a 4-story building with peeling yellow paint, vanish behind the corner. 5 years of nightmare were finally behind her. You're not wanted by anyone, not even your own parents. Mrs. Heitner's voice echoed in her mind. The headmistress loved repeating that line during assemblies, especially when the kids got too loud or asked inconvenient questions. Raven still remembered the first time she'd heard it, how those words cut sharper than a knife, stung worse than a slap. 5 years. 5 years of cold hallways, squeaky beds, and uniforms that were always either too big or too small. 5 years of being called by a number or last name, never by your real one. 5 years of nothing being yours, not your things, not your time, not even your thoughts or feelings. Everything had to fit the rules. Street after street passed by. The residential blocks gave way to warehouses, garages, and empty lots. Raven kept running, gasping now not just from exhaustion but from the flood of memories. Only the image of Miss Lanter, the literature teacher with kind eyes behind old-fashioned glasses, gave her warmth. She had taught Raven to knit, slipped her books that weren't part of the curriculum, and sometimes, when Mrs. Heitner wasn't watching, gently stroked her hair and whispered, "My girl." "I'm sorry, Miss Lanter," Raven whispered into the dark. "But I can't stay there anymore." Yesterday, everything became clear. The new girl, Katie, only 9, had been crying in the bathroom. Raven found her there, curled up with red, swollen eyes. She said, "I'll never get out of here," Katie sobbed. "That my mom forgot me, and everyone else will too." "Who told you that?" "Mrs. Heitner." "Who else?" Raven hugged her tightly, feeling something inside her snap. She couldn't be part of that place any longer. She couldn't watch those children's spirits being crushed every day. She couldn't wait until she turned 18. By then, there would be nothing left of her either. Her breath hitched. She slowed to a walk, scanning the dim horizon. She was close now, to Willow Creek. The place wasn't chosen at random. It was here, along Route 9 by the riverbank, that her life had changed 5 years ago. This was where she'd lost her mother. And this was where her new life would begin. A cool breeze brushed her face, and Raven instinctively slowed down. She swallowed hard. Water. Again. Every time she saw a river, a lake, even a large puddle, her throat tightened. Panic rose like a wave, wild, uncontrollable. Raven forced herself forward. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded notebook page. Then she opened her backpack and checked what she had: a loaf of bread wrapped in newspaper to keep it soft, a plastic bottle of water, a warm sweater, a toothbrush, some coins, and a toy rabbit. A shabby little plush rabbit with one ear missing. The only thing left from her past. From her mother. Raven pressed the toy to her face, inhaling its scent. It still seemed to smell faintly of her mother's perfume, light and floral. Of course, by now it only smelled like dust and the orphanage dormitory. But her imagination clung to the illusion. The riverbank was empty. The sand was damp and heavy from yesterday's rain. Raven walked to the edge of the water and set down her backpack. She pulled out a few stolen items, an old blue sweater nobody wore and a worn-out cap, and arranged them on the sand in the shape of a body. Next to it, she placed a note, "Gone to be with Mom. Sorry." Her handwriting shook, the letters came out uneven. Maybe that was even better, it looked more believable. A final touch to complete the illusion. Raven stepped back a few paces to take it all in. It looked exactly like someone had left their things before walking into the river and never coming back. A staged suicide. The criminal code popped into her head from civics class, and she gave a bitter smile. She could probably get time for this. But who would she really be hurting? No one but herself. And that wasn't a crime. She took a few steps toward the water, and then it hit her. The quiet ripple of the river turned into a deafening roar. Her ears rang, and suddenly she saw it all again, as vividly as if it were yesterday. "Mom, look. I'm a mermaid." 7-year-old Raven splashed on an inflatable mattress, kicking her legs in the water. The August sun glittered on the river like a mirror. After a day at the amusement park, they'd stopped at the beach. Her mom said they needed to celebrate a special day. Raven hadn't really understood what was so special, but she was happy to swim, and to see her mother smiling again. Lately, she hadn't smiled much, always whispering into the phone, talking tensely about money and debts. But today was different. They'd ridden the carousel, eaten cotton candy, and her mom had even won her a small plush rabbit at the fair. "Raven, don't go too far," Evelyn called, brushing her sun-bleached hair from her face. "Remember, I can't swim." "I remember." Raven flipped on the mattress, pretending to be a whale. And then, in an instant, everything changed. The mattress tipped over, and she slipped into the water. Her arms flailed, her feet couldn't find the bottom. Water filled her nose and mouth. "Mom," was all she managed to scream. A splash, and Evelyn was there, grabbing her, pushing her upward, helping her grip the mattress. "Climb on," her mother's voice cracked in panic. "Hurry." Raven clutched the edge and pulled herself up. She turned, and saw her mom drifting farther and farther away. The current. "Mom, grab on. I'll help you." "Stay there. You'll tip over." Raven froze, unable to move. Her mother was struggling in the water, her movements growing weaker by the second. She couldn't swim, never could. She jumped in without thinking, only to save her daughter. "Help!" Raven screamed. "Somebody help!" People on the shore turned. Someone ran toward the water. 2 men jumped in and began swimming fast, but not fast enough. "Mom, hold on!" Raven cried. Evelyn looked at her daughter, and in that look was so much love it didn't seem humanly possible to hold it all in her eyes. "I love you, my bunny," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Be strong." And then she disappeared beneath the surface. The men reached them. One pushed Raven's mattress toward the shore, the other dove under, searching for Evelyn. But the current had already carried her away. The rescue team arrived half an hour later. They found her body that evening, 2 miles downstream. "No." Raven dropped to her knees by the water, gasping for breath. "No, no, no." She clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. She had to live. Her mom hadn't given up her life so her daughter could throw hers away now. "Be strong." Her mother's last words echoed in her head like a bell. Raven slowly stood up. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, grabbed her backpack, and walked away from the water toward the dark outline of the alder bushes along the highway. She'd wait there until sunrise. Then she'd move on toward the villages. She'd heard most villagers were old people. She just needed to find one place that would take in an extra pair of hands. Somewhere she could live, hard, but free. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when a police car pulled up to the riverbank. Hidden in the bushes, Raven watched as Mrs. Heitner stepped out, straight-backed, composed, wearing a dark navy suit. Behind her came 2 officers and Miss Lanter, her face swollen from crying. The night guard noticed her missing during shift change at 6 a.m., the headmistress told the officers. She called me right away. We searched the grounds, then remembered the girl had a trauma connected to this river. Her mother drowned here 5 years ago. One of the officers, a young man with tired eyes, nodded, jotting notes into a pad. So, the note was found on her bed? Yes, Mrs. Heitner said, handing him a plastic bag. It says, "Gone to be with Mom." Sorry. Our teacher confirmed it's her handwriting. Miss Lanter let out a sob, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Oh, God, poor child. I knew she was suffering. I should have paid more attention. The officers walked closer to the water, scanning the shoreline. One bent down and picked up a cap. Are these her things? Miss Lanter nodded through tears. Yes. She wore that cap all the time. Mrs. Heitner led Miss Lanter aside, lowering her voice, but Raven still heard every word. There's no need to mention that the girl was depressed. Nothing indicated any trouble, understood? We don't need inspections or investigations. Just handle the paperwork. Her file needs to be sent to the police. Miss Lanter opened her mouth as if to argue but then silently nodded, looking away. We'll list her as missing, the senior officer said as he approached. But we'll start searching the river immediately. I'll call the divers. Of course, Mrs. Heitner pursed her lips. We'll hope for a miracle, but... She didn't finish the sentence, glancing meaningfully at the river. Raven watched the scene unfold, feeling strangely empty. They believed it. So easily, so quickly. No one even considered that she might have run away, to live, not to die. Well, she thought, that's even better. They won't come looking. She stayed hidden until the police and the orphanage staff drove away. Then she spent the whole day in the bushes, sipping water and nibbling on bits of bread. When darkness began to fall, she finally crawled out of her hiding spot, brushed off the twigs and leaves clinging to her clothes, and started walking along the highway, keeping close to the forest's edge so passing cars wouldn't spot her. Clutching her worn-out rabbit to her chest, Raven whispered softly, as if her mother could still hear her. I'll be okay, Mom. You taught me to be strong. I'll survive. The night slowly parted before her. The August sky, sprinkled with stars, stretched endlessly above the road, disappearing into the distance. Raven walked along Route 9, hiding behind trees whenever headlights approached. Each time a car cut through the darkness, she froze, pressing herself against the trunks until the light passed. The air, once hot and heavy, was turning cooler. Raven pulled a warm sweater from her backpack and slipped it over her t-shirt. Her shoulders ached from the weight of the bag, a burden filled with a few necessities and the remnants of her past. Running from the orphanage felt like being uprooted, painful, but necessary for new growth. The mix of exhaustion and freedom filled her with a strange, dizzying sense of power. Each step felt like a small victory over the system that had tried to erase her identity. Every breath tasted like freedom, sharp and alive, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. After an hour, her legs throbbed, and her stomach growled with hunger. But she couldn't stop, not yet. She had to get as far away as possible before sunrise. Raven tore off a piece of bread from her bag, chewed it as she walked, and kept moving forward. Suddenly, through the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of passing cars, Raven heard a sound, frantic barking. She froze, listening. The bark wasn't aggressive, it sounded desperate, pleading. The orphanage rule, don't get involved where you're not wanted, fought with her curiosity. And with fear. After that day in the orphanage, when the older boys sicked a stray dog on the little kids, she'd been afraid of dogs ever since. She could still hear their laughter, the children's screams, and the guard dog slamming against the bars of its cage, almost breaking free. But this bark was different. There was something human in it. As if it wasn't just a dog barking, but someone calling for help through the dog. Don't be stupid, Raven whispered to herself, but she still stepped off the roadside and into the forest. Pushing through the bushes, she followed the sound, moving cautiously. The barking grew louder. A few minutes later, the trees opened up to reveal a small clearing, lit by the pale glow of the moon. There, at the edge of a shallow pit, a small dog in a bright red jumpsuit was darting back and forth, barking frantically. He'd run to the edge, bark, jump back, and repeat. When he noticed Raven, his barking became even more desperate, as if begging her to follow. "Easy, boy," Raven said softly, taking a few careful steps forward. "What's wrong?" The dog, a miniature pinscher, as Raven guessed, ran to her, grabbed the hem of her jeans with his teeth, and tugged toward the hole. She leaned over and peered down. In the moonlight, she saw a man standing at the bottom of a 2-meter deep pit, looking up at her. "Thank God," he breathed, spotting her. "I thought this little guy would never bring anyone." Raven flinched, ready to bolt. 5 years in the orphanage had taught her one thing: never trust adults, especially men. "Wait, please," the man said, his voice tired but not threatening. "I just need help. I've been stuck down here for 2 hours." Raven hesitated, then slowly stepped closer to the edge. She could see him better now, mid-30s, dressed in a business suit caked with clay. Dark hair with a touch of gray at the temples. Sharp, tired features. "How did you even get down there?" she asked, keeping her distance. He rubbed his face and sighed. "It's stupid, really. I was visiting a nearby village, Riverbend. There's an old house there that belonged to my grandfather. He passed away 3 years ago, and it's been empty ever since. I thought I'd check on it, maybe sell it. But no one's buying out there, the village is practically dead." He leaned against the muddy wall of the pit. "On the way back, I stopped to rest. Charlie," he nodded at the dog, "wanted to go out. I let him, and he ran off into the woods. I went after him, and bam. Fell right into this hole. Must be an old quarry or something. I managed to pull him out, but I couldn't get myself up. My phone's in the car." While he spoke, Raven steadied the pit. The edges had crumbled, the ground was soft from the rain. "I tried climbing out," he added, "but the walls are too slick. And I'm not exactly 20 anymore." There was a hint of humor in his voice, and Raven relaxed a little. If a man can joke about himself, he's probably not dangerous. "Probably. I can find a branch," she said. "Something long enough for you to grab." "That'd be great," he replied. Raven looked around and spotted a dry branch of decent length nearby. She dragged it to the edge and lowered one end into the pit. "Grab on," she said. The man gripped the branch, but as soon as he tried to pull himself up, it cracked under his weight. Raven felt it slip from her hands and barely jumped back in time to avoid falling in herself. "Damn it! That's not gonna work," the man groaned when the branch snapped. "Too fragile." Raven frowned, thinking fast. Then an idea hit her. "I've got an idea," she said. "Hang on." She dropped her backpack, pulled out a spare sweater, then took off the one she was wearing, standing there in just her t-shirt. She tied the sleeves of both sweaters together, pulling on the knots to test their strength. "Too short," she muttered, measuring it against the pit's depth. "Wait," the man said quickly, shrugging off his jacket. "Here, use this too." He balled up the jacket and tossed it up. Raven caught it, tied it securely to her sweaters, then wrapped one end of her makeshift rope around a young birch tree at the edge of the pit. The other end she dropped down. "Hold on tight," she said. "I'll keep a grip on it too, just in case." The man grabbed the rope and started climbing. His shoes slipped against the muddy wall, struggling for traction. The first try failed, his hand slid, and he fell back down with a dull thud and a curse. "Sorry," he muttered. "Let me try again." He wiped his hands on his pants, shook off some dirt, and grabbed the rope once more. This time he pulled harder, bracing his feet against the wall. With one strong heave, he reached the top and rolled over the edge, gasping for breath. He lay flat on his back for a few seconds, staring up at the sky. Charlie barked joyfully, jumped onto his chest, and started licking his face. Ugh, Charlie, stop, the man groaned weakly, swatting at him, though his voice was full of affection. You almost got me killed, you know. Finally, he sat up, brushing off dirt and leaves, then looked at Raven intently. She stood a few steps away, watching him warily. Thank you, he said seriously. I don't know how much longer I would have been stuck down there. My name's Kyle. Kyle Mitchell. Raven, the girl said after a pause, not giving her last name. Kyle nodded, respecting that boundary. He looked her over, thin, wary gray eyes, worn-out clothes, a backpack stuffed with bare essentials. Alone in the woods in the middle of the night. He didn't need to be a detective to figure it out, she was running. From something. Or someone. Do your parents know where you are? He asked carefully. Raven tensed, her eyes hardening. She shook her head. Kyle didn't push. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, damp, but the bills inside were dry. Look, you saved me. I owe you one. I can give you a ride, wherever you need to go. Or he hesitated, trying not to scare her. I could take you home? Raven shook her head again, this time firmly. I'm not going home, she said quietly. Kyle noticed her eyes flick toward her backpack, where a piece of newspaper poked out from under the flap. Probably wrapped around bread. A bottle of water. A warm sweater. The supplies of someone who had nowhere else to go. You ran away from the orphanage, didn't you? He asked directly. Raven froze, like a deer caught in headlights, then slowly nodded. Please don't take me back. Something tightened in Kyle's chest. I won't, he said quietly. If you don't want to go back, I won't. He sat down right there on the grass, giving her space. Even scooted back a little so she wouldn't feel cornered. Charlie lay down beside him, resting his chin on his paws, watching Raven with bright, intelligent eyes. Listen, Kyle said gently, I'm not going to force you to go anywhere. I just need to understand how I can help. It's the middle of the night. You're alone. You don't even know where you're headed. My car's nearby. I could at least drive you somewhere safe. Raven hesitated, shifting from foot to foot. I get it, you don't trust me, he said. And you shouldn't. I wouldn't either. So how about this? I'll tell you a bit about myself, and then you can decide if you want my help. He paused, thinking for a moment. I have a younger sister, Jordan. She's 33 now. When I was 19 and she was 14, our parents died in a car accident. I became her legal guardian. Kyle gave a faint, bitter smile. Can you imagine? 19, just started college, and suddenly, boom. You're the adult. You're responsible for everything. It wasn't easy. He absent-mindedly scratched Charlie behind the ear. Jordan's had problems. First alcohol, then gambling. When she was 23, she got pregnant by a guy who's now in prison for drugs. That's how Annalise came along, my niece. She's 9 now. Jordan says she's clean, but he sighed. Anyway, I try to take care of both of them. It doesn't always work out, but I do my best. Raven listened silently. Without realizing it, she'd moved a little closer. Charlie trotted over to her, and she started stroking him absently. And what about you? Kyle asked softly. Can you tell me what happened? I promise I won't take you anywhere. I just want to understand. Raven sat down on the grass, wrapping her arms around her knees. The silence stretched long enough that Kyle thought she wouldn't answer, but then a quiet voice broke the stillness. My mom drowned. 5 years ago. I was there. I saw it happen. Her voice faltered. Kyle didn't interrupt. My dad didn't want to take me. He has a new family now. So they sent me to the orphanage. 5 years there. It's not a place to live, it's a place to survive. She looked at Kyle, and in her eyes he saw the reflection of the moon, and pain no 12-year-old should ever carry. Mrs. Heitner, the director, she always said, none of you are wanted, not even by your own parents. Every day. And after a while, you start to believe her. Raven clenched her fists until her knuckles turned white. I couldn't stay there anymore. So I ran away tonight. Left some clothes by the river and a note. To make them think that I drowned. Like my mom. Then they wouldn't look for me. She spoke faster and faster, as if afraid she might lose her nerve. I wanted to find some village, far from the city. Maybe some old people who'd need help. I could work for food and a roof. Until I turn 18. And after that I'll figure it out. Kyle listened, feeling a heavy ache build inside him. The girl in front of him was the same age as his niece, a child who decided it was better to fake her own death and wander from village to village, working for scraps, than stay in a place meant to protect her. He tried to imagine Annalise in her shoes. What if something happened to him? What if Jordan lost control again? Would his niece end up in a place like that? The thought made his stomach twist. And this girl, this child, had just saved his life. Pulled him out of a pit where he might have stayed until morning, maybe longer. Now she was looking at him with eyes full of both hope and fear. Then it hit him. The old house in Riverbend. His grandfather's house. It had been empty for 3 years now. He'd thought of tearing it down, but couldn't bring himself to. Too many memories, too many of his grandmother's things he couldn't throw away. It wasn't worth selling. No one would buy a crumbling house in a dying village. But to give it away. Listen, he said slowly, still unsure if he was doing the right thing. I have an idea. Maybe a crazy one. There's this house, my grandfather's old place in Riverbend. It's falling apart a little, but the roof's fine, windows are intact. There's a stove for heating and a well in the yard. The village is almost empty, but a few old folks still live there. I was planning to tear it down, but... He looked her straight in the eyes. If you want, you can stay there. I'll cover the electricity. Leave you some money to start with. Raven stared at him, stunned. Really? She whispered. You give me a house? Just like that? Not completely just like that, Kyle said with a small smile. There are a few rules. If anyone asks, you're the granddaughter of my old neighbors, here for the summer. Don't ever tell anyone I gave you the house, okay? I can't take you in officially, I don't have that right. If the authorities find out, they'll send you back. He sighed. I know it's not exactly legal. But the alternative is you out here, alone, in the woods, at night. Raven looked at him as if he'd just offered her the moon. Her eyes shimmered with tears, not from pain this time, but from relief. Thank you, she whispered. It was all she could manage. Kyle got up, brushing off his pants. Then let's go. The car's close by. Riverbend's about 20 minutes from here. The old Volkswagen rolled softly down the dark road, its headlights catching broken asphalt and overgrown weeds. Raven sat in the passenger seat, clutching her backpack tightly, a reflex from years in the orphanage, where you kept your belongings close or lost them. Charlie curled up in her lap, snoring softly. Raven gently stroked his head, still not quite believing any of this was real. My granddad built that house back in the 60s, Kyle said. He and my grandma spent every summer there. Raised chickens, a goat. Grandpa built everything himself, the porch, the window frames, everything. He turned off the main road onto a dirt path, and the car began to rattle and bounce over potholes. Sorry about the road, he said. The last few miles are rough. Nobody bothers to fix it anymore, not enough people left to make it worth it. 15 minutes later, the Volkswagen rolled into Riverbend, a handful of houses lining a single street. Most were dark, boarded up. A couple still had faint lights glowing in the windows. Here we are, Kyle said, stopping the car in front of a small wooden house with carved window frames. This is it. Raven stepped out of the car, still holding Charlie, and froze in front of the house. In the darkness, it looked almost magical, solid, a little squat, with carved wooden details that made it look like something out of an old storybook. Kyle unlocked the door. The light switch clicked, and a dim bulb flickered on. The air smelled musty, mixed with something else: wood, herbs, old books. The smell of a home that had once been filled with life. "No one's cleaned up in a while," Kyle said, running his finger across the table and leaving a trail in the dust. "But everything's still here. No mice either, that's something." He opened a window, letting in fresh air, and showed her around. 3 rooms plus a kitchen. The furniture was old but sturdy. Embroidered towels hung on the walls, and framed photos watched from every corner. "Here's the gas stove," Kyle said, lighting a burner. "Still works. There's gas left in the tank, but when it runs out, let me know and I'll bring a new one. The water's from the well out back. You know how to use a fireplace?" Raven shook her head. "That's okay, you'll learn. Once the fire's burning, just close this little flap here so the heat doesn't escape through the chimney." Kyle pulled out his wallet and placed a few bills on the table. "Here's $200. That should last you for a bit. I'll bring more later. I'll give you my number too. If you ever need something, find a way to call me. Just be careful around the locals. Don't tell anyone your real story. You're the neighbor's granddaughter, here for the summer, got it?" Raven nodded. Everything felt unreal, like she might wake up any second back in the cold dorm room of the orphanage. Kyle walked toward the door but stopped halfway. "Listen, this might sound dumb, but are you sure you'll be okay? Alone, in a strange place?" Raven smiled, for the first time that night, a real smile. "I survived 5 years in an orphanage. I'll be fine." Kyle nodded, and there was something like respect in his eyes. "Good luck. I'll stop by sometimes to check on you." He stepped outside and closed the door behind him. A minute later, Raven heard the Volkswagen's engine start, its sound fading into the distance until it disappeared into the quiet of the night. She was alone. In a stranger's house. The old walls creaked softly, whispering in their own language. Raven walked slowly through the rooms, running her hand along the faded wallpaper, the worn polish of the table, the rough surface of the stove. She stopped by the window, looking out into the August night. For the first time in 5 years, she was truly alone, no overseers, no schedules, no rules, no humiliation. Just silence. Peace. Safety. The moon broke through the clouds, casting pale light on the small figure standing by the window of the old country house. Raven pressed her palm to the glass and whispered, "Thank you, Mom. I'm home." Morning sunlight crept shyly through the windows, painting the old wallpaper in soft gold. Dust danced lazily in the air. Raven woke up with the first rooster's crow, but for a few minutes she just lay there, listening to the silence, the real kind, not the heavy, suffocating quiet of the orphanage dorm, filled with snoring and creaking beds. She didn't want to get up. Her body still remembered the orphanage routine, jump up at the bell, but her mind reveled in the luxury of choice. She could stay in bed as long as she wanted. Eat when she wanted. Decide for herself how to spend the day. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. A week had passed since she'd met Kyle. Every morning, Raven woke with the same feeling, that it was all a strange dream, that any second the door would burst open and Mrs. Heitner would appear, shouting her name. But the door stayed closed, and the house remained hers. Today there was a lot to do. Raven stretched and glanced around. In a week, she'd only managed the surface cleaning, but the place needed much more. Rusted pipes, dust in every corner, cobwebs on the ceiling, a creaky porch, everything begged for attention. She washed up with cold water, hot had to be heated in a pot on the stove, ate a piece of bread with leftover milk, and got to work. Washing windows, wiping dust, beating old rugs, each task made the house feel a little less like a stranger's and a little more like hers. "I wonder if that's what real homemakers feel like," she whispered to her dusty toy rabbit sitting on the dresser. "When everything around you is yours, and no one tells you you're doing it wrong." By noon, she'd reached the porch. One of the boards had bent dangerously under her weight that morning when she went for water. In the shed, she found tools, hammer, nails, even a few planks neatly stacked, probably left there by Kyle's grandfather. How does this work? Raven studied the porch thoughtfully. Back at the orphanage, all repairs were handled by Earl, the grumpy maintenance man who never let kids anywhere near his tools. Through trial and error, banging her fingers a few times and learning some new words that fit perfectly with the process, she managed to fix it. The porch no longer creaked dangerously. The small success filled her with pride, though there was no one to share it with except the sparrows watching curiously from a nearby tree. The village of Riverbend moved at its own slow pace. 12 houses, 8 still lived in. 15 people total, all retirees. Kyle had told her that, but she hadn't met anyone yet. She stayed cautious, remembering his warning about her cover story. The second day was bright and sunny, and Raven decided to work in the garden. It was overgrown but still held traces of neat old beds. She found a hoe in the shed and began pulling weeds, glancing now and then over the low fence where she saw movement in the neighboring yard. "Hello there, dear." Raven jumped and turned. An elderly woman stood by the fence, short, with gray hair braided into a neat plait, wearing a blue cotton dress and a faded headscarf. Her wrinkled face radiated warm curiosity. "Hello," Raven said, straightening up and wiping sweat from her forehead. "I saw someone moved into the Mitchell place," the woman said cheerfully. "Thought I'd stop by and introduce myself. I'm Ashley, your neighbor." "Raven," the girl replied, trying to recall the story she was supposed to stick to. "And where are your parents, dear?" Ashley asked, narrowing her eyes as she looked around the yard. Raven swallowed hard. Here it was, her first real test. "Mom's resting," she began carefully. "She's sick. Tuberculosis. The doctor said she needs fresh air and nature. They gave her 6 months, maybe a year." She lowered her eyes so the woman wouldn't see the lie there. Her instincts, sharpened in the orphanage, told her that pity kept people from asking too many questions. "Oh, dear Lord," Ashley gasped, clapping her hands together. "And your father?" "He died." That, at least, wasn't far from the truth. He hadn't died, but he was gone from her life just as completely. "You poor child," Ashley sighed. "How old are you?" 12. Raven poked at the soil with her hoe. "And it's just you and your sick mother? What about other family?" "They're far away," Raven said softly. "Oh my," Ashley murmured, shaking her head. "Well, you come see me if you ever need anything, all right? I'll help if I can. I've got a goat, I can bring you some fresh milk. Don't be shy." "Thank you," Raven said, lifting her gaze. "I can help you too, with the garden or around the house." "That's good," Ashley smiled. "It's hard to do everything alone at my age. A helping hand is always welcome." And that's how their friendship began, a small lie built on genuine kindness. Raven helped Ashley in her garden, carried water from the well, fed the chickens. In return, Ashley shared fresh eggs, milk, and vegetables from her garden. Raven could tell the older woman suspected something, but she never asked. Soon, word spread through the local radio, the village gossip network that never failed, rain or shine, about the girl caring for her sick mother. The other elderly villagers began asking for her help too, chopping firewood, fixing fences, carrying water. They paid her however they could, with food, old but sturdy clothes, or a few small bills. In October, while exploring the house, Raven found a hidden treasure in an old dresser, balls of wool yarn, knitting needles of all sizes, hooks, even a small hand loom. Her fingers instinctively reached for them. Miss Lanter had taught her to knit. It was the one place where Raven had felt free, where she could make something that was truly her own. Miss Lanter had reminded her of her mother in subtle ways, maybe in the way she pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, or in her calm, kind voice. Her first attempt didn't go well. Her hands were stiff, the stitches uneven, the pattern lost after every few rows. But slowly, her rhythm returned. Every evening, when the day's chores were done, Raven sat by the stove, the quiet clinking of needles filling the warm half-darkness. She gave her first doily to Ashley as a thank you for her kindness and silent understanding. The old woman's eyes filled with tears as she admired the delicate work. "My goodness, what a gift you have," Ashley said, moved. "We haven't seen such fine work here in ages. You know, you could sell these. Folks on the highway love handmade things, especially before Christmas. You get good money for something like this." The idea stuck in Raven's mind. By November, she had knitted enough for her first trade expedition. She built a small wooden display table, found an old stool, and laid out a clean cloth. On top, she arranged her treasures, patterned doilies, socks, scarves, even a couple of mittens with simple designs. That first day by the roadside was terrifying. Every passing car felt like a threat, every slowing vehicle a potential informant. But little by little, fear gave way to excitement. By evening, she'd sold 3 pairs of socks and 1 doily, earning nearly $30, a fortune by village standards. And so her new rhythm of life began. Mornings spent helping the elderly, evenings filled with knitting, and once a week, selling her creations by the highway. By December, she was earning around $100 to $150 a month, not counting what she got in trade from the villagers. Winter came suddenly. Overnight, Riverbend was blanketed in thick snow. But Raven was ready. Firewood stacked, roof patched. She'd learned how to keep a steady fire going in the stove for hours. Learned how to chop wood properly, swinging just right to avoid straining her back. Learned how to shovel snow efficiently so she didn't move the same pile twice. It was hard work, but it was a good kind of hard. Not the draining exhaustion of the orphanage, where every day felt like an endless struggle to stay unnoticed. Here, her body tired, but her soul rested. In the evenings, as early twilight settled over the village, Raven lit a kerosene lamp. Electricity worked, but it was dim, and she liked saving it, and read books she'd found in the house. Old, yellowed editions of Thoreau, Whitman, London. Their calm, grounded words soothed her. In those pages, nature was alive, close, and kind, just like she felt it now in Riverbend. Only the nightmares remained. Every week, sometimes more, she woke drenched in sweat from the same dream, her mother drowning, reaching out, calling her name, and Raven frozen, unable to move. In those moments, she hugged her worn-out rabbit tight and whispered to it, the only witness to her weakness. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. Uncle Kyle, look. I drew us." Annalise proudly held out a page from her sketchbook, covered in bright colors. 3 figures, a tall man, a woman with long blonde hair, and a little girl in the middle. All 3 holding hands and smiling. Kyle looked up from his laptop, where he'd been reviewing quarterly reports, and smiled. The home office, a constant reality for a mid-level entrepreneur, where work and life blended into one. "This is great," he said, ruffling his niece's hair. "Your mom looks especially beautiful." "I worked really hard on her," Annalise said, curling up beside him like she used to when she was little. "She is really beautiful, right?" "She is," Kyle agreed, glancing toward the kitchen, where Jordan was cooking dinner, softly humming to herself. Their 3-bedroom apartment in Riverside Commons had been home for 3 years now. Standard layout, developer's neutral decor, IKEA furniture. Kyle always meant to make it more personal, but never found the time or the point. He rented the place, preferring to invest in his business rather than a mortgage. Mitchell Logistics, his small transport company, was holding steady but not thriving. The last year had been rough, rising fuel prices, growing competition, and twice as many government inspections. Profits were shrinking, but Kyle kept going. For himself, for his sister, and most of all, for Annalise. Jordan stepped into the room, wiping her hands on her apron. "Dinner's in 15 minutes, she said. "Annalise, go wash your hands." His niece slid off Kyle's lap and ran out of the room. Jordan sat down beside her brother on the couch. "How's work?" she asked, her voice carrying a tension Kyle hadn't heard in a while. "Same as always," he said, watching her closely. "We're managing." Jordan nodded, twisting the edge of her apron between her fingers. "Kyle, listen, I need some money." Just a little. For a new jacket for Annalise, her old one's worn out. Kyle frowned. Something in her tone set off an old alarm. For the last 2 years, Jordan had been doing well, no drinking, no gambling, taking care of her daughter. But he'd heard those exact words too many times over the last decade, "I need some money," always followed by promises of good intentions. "Of course," he said. "I'll withdraw some tomorrow." "What about your own money? Weren't you still working part-time at the tailor shop?" "They're behind on payments," Jordan said, avoiding his eyes. "I'll pay you back as soon as." "Oh, come on," Kyle waved it off. "Don't even say that. We don't keep score. Anything for Annalise." That night, after Jordan and her daughter had gone to bed, Kyle quietly slipped into his sister's room. He hated himself for it, the snooping, the mistrust, but too many times, her promises had shattered against reality. He found a stack of envelopes hidden under her sweaters in the closet. Loan receipts. Microloans. 5 of them, each for $400. $2,000 total. And those were just the ones he found. The next morning, over breakfast, Kyle set the envelope on the table between them and waited until Annalise went to her room to get ready for school. "What's this?" Jordan went pale. "What happened? Is it the casino again?" "No." She shook her head quickly. "I swear, I didn't gamble. I just needed money for Annalise's clothes. I didn't want to bother you, you already carry everything. I thought I could handle it myself." "Jordan." "It's true." Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't relapse. I just..." Kyle sighed. "I'll pay them off. But Jordan, please, no more secrets. We're family. We deal with things together, okay?" Jordan nodded, wiping her face. "No more secrets. I promise." He wanted to believe her. He really did. February 2024 was brutally cold. Kyle was coming home after a long, tense meeting with his suppliers. Prices had gone up again, margins were shrinking, and he was running out of solutions. He climbed the stairs to the 7th floor. The elevator had been out for 2 weeks, and unlocked the door. The apartment was dark and silent. Too silent. Usually by this time, Annalise would be back from art school, her music playing through the speakers. "Jordan?" "Annalise," he called, switching on the light. No answer. The living room was empty. The kitchen too. Finally, when he looked into Jordan's bedroom, he saw her. She was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, her face swollen and streaked with tears. Her eyes were red, empty. "Jordan, what happened?" Kyle knelt down beside her. "Are you sick? Where's Annalise?" Without a word, Jordan handed him a sheet of paper. A computer printout. Plain black text on white. "We have your daughter. Your mother's debt, $110,000. She'll be returned 2 weeks after full repayment. Go to the police, and you'll never see her again." The world tilted. Kyle didn't even remember sitting down, but suddenly he was on the floor next to her, his heart pounding in his ears, blood rushing away from his face. "How much?" he forced out. "How much do you owe?" Jordan's lips trembled, but no words came, only shallow, shaking sobs. "How much?" he repeated, his voice low and mechanical, almost not his own. $110,000, she whispered finally. Kyle stared at her, and the world he had so carefully built began to collapse piece by piece. The world where Jordan had overcome her addiction. Where they were finally safe, finally stable. The world where Annalise had nothing to fear. "When?" he asked quietly, surprised at how calm he sounded. "When did you start gambling again?" 3 months ago. Jordan buried her face in her hands. "I ran into Haley, remember her? We used to work together. She said she knew a place where you could make quick money. I went just to watch. And then... She broke down completely, sobbing into her knees. Kyle said nothing. Didn't yell. Didn't curse. And that silence, cold, steady, terrified Jordan more than anything. "I'll sell everything," he said finally, his voice flat, almost too quiet. "The business, the car. The apartment isn't mine, but I'll sell the furniture. That'll get me maybe $80,000. The rest, loans. $110,000. Do you understand what that means? We'll lose everything. We'll have nowhere to live. I'll have to start over from nothing at 38. Do you understand that?" Jordan sobbed harder, smearing tears across her face. "I didn't mean to. I thought I could win it back. At Fortune Palace they said I could fix it all in one night. They kept lending, saying you're just unlucky today, you'll win tomorrow." "Give me the number," Kyle interrupted, pointing at the note. Jordan pulled a crumpled scrap of paper from her jeans pocket and handed it over. Kyle took out his phone and dialed the number. A few long rings. Then a click. A man's voice came through, calm, businesslike, disturbingly composed. "I'm listening." "This is Kyle Mitchell," he said. "Jordan's brother. I'm calling about the debt." "I'm listening," the voice repeated, showing no surprise, no emotion at all. "I'll pay the debt," Kyle said. "All of it. But I need time. 2 weeks." A pause. 2 weeks. The girl stays safe if the money comes in on time. If not, start searching the woods. Kyle's jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached. "You heard me," he said through his teeth. 2 weeks. Not a day more. "I heard you," the man replied. "I'll be waiting for your call." Kyle ended the call and turned to his sister. Jordan looked at him with a mix of fear and desperate hope. His eyes were empty, no anger, no blame. Just exhaustion and cold determination. "If anything happens to Annalise," he said quietly, "I don't know what I'll do. But I know I won't be able to live with you." Jordan broke down sobbing again, but this time Kyle didn't comfort her. He stood up, went to the kitchen, and poured himself a glass of water. His hands were shaking, but his mind was cold and sharp. Outside, twilight fell hard and fast, as if someone had thrown a dark blanket over the city. Snow had been falling all day, thick and silent, muffling every sound and making everything feel unreal. Annalise stood at the entrance of her art school, watching her breath turn into small clouds of mist. It was 6:30 in the evening. She shivered and burrowed deeper into her pink jacket. On the fogged-up glass door, she traced invisible patterns, winding lines like the ones Uncle Kyle had shown her when he explained how roads and intersections worked. Logistics, a complicated word, but she liked knowing what it meant. Dan, her uncle's driver, was late. Unusual. He was always on time, cracking jokes about punctuality, always helping her carry her heavy sketchbook. Annalise checked her phone, no messages. The connection was weak because of the blizzard. The school was empty now, except for the security guard downstairs. She could have gone back inside to wait in the warmth, but her 9-year-old pride wouldn't let her. She'd already said her goodbyes, going back would look silly. "Annalise?" A woman's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. A stranger was walking toward her, middle-aged, bundled in a dark winter coat. Strands of dark hair peeked from under a knitted hat. Her smile seemed kind, almost motherly. "I'm from Kyle," the woman said, stopping a few steps away. "He asked me to pick you up. Dan's stuck in traffic on the bypass. Terrible weather." Annalise tensed. Uncle Kyle had taught her not to trust strangers, no matter how nice they seemed. But this woman knew his name, and Dan's, and... "Kyle also said to tell you he's got you new watercolor paints," the woman added, as if reading her mind. "The big set, 18 colors, the one you wanted. That did it. Only Mom, Uncle Kyle, and her teacher knew about those paints." Annalise nodded, fixed her hat, and stepped forward. "Who are you?" she asked cautiously as they approached a dark gray SUV parked a little ways off. "A colleague of your uncle's," the woman said, opening the back door. "Get in, sweetheart. It's warm, the heater's on." Heat wrapped around her as soon as she climbed into the back seat. The woman circled the car and got in behind the wheel. In the dim light, Annalise noticed a man sitting in the passenger seat, but couldn't make out his face. "Seatbelt," the woman said over her shoulder. Annalise reached for it, and in that instant, everything changed. The man in the front turned sharply, something dark flashed in his hands. A split second later, the world went black. Heavy fabric dropped over her head, pressing against her throat. "Don't scream, or it'll get worse," a man's voice hissed right beside her ear. Annalise froze, terror choking her. The car lurched forward, speeding up. She tried to pull off the bag, but the man grabbed her wrists and bound them tight with something hard, plastic ties, maybe rope. "Stay still," he warned. "Nothing will happen to you if your mom pays what she owes." "Debt? What debt?" Fragments of overheard conversations flashed through her mind, her mother crying at night, her uncle talking about loans, the worried glances they shared when they thought she wasn't looking. Time stopped making sense. Minutes stretched, or maybe hours collapsed into seconds. She tried to count turns, remember directions, just like Uncle Kyle had taught her when they hiked through the woods, but soon lost track. Fear blurred everything. When the car finally stopped, she was trembling uncontrollably. A door slammed. Silence. Then another door. Someone's hands grabbed her, pulling her out into the cold. The icy air bit through her clothes, stealing her breath. "Sit still," the man growled. She was dropped onto something hard, a bench or a tree stump. The bag was yanked off her head, and blinding light hit her eyes. Blinking through tears, Annalise saw they were in a forest clearing. The headlights carved bright holes through the darkness, lighting up snowdrifts and bare trees. Two men stood a few yards away, smoking and talking quietly. The woman was gone. "Boss said 2 weeks," one of the men said. "If the money doesn't come, we leave her here. Nature'll take care of it." "Pretty harsh, even for Reuben," said the shorter one. "She's just a kid." "Then her mom should have paid up," the first man shrugged. "I'm heading back to the car, it's freezing. You keep watch." Annalise froze. Leave her here? Let nature take care of it. They were going to kill her. Just leave her to die. Panic surged like fire in her chest. "Think," she ordered herself, hearing Kyle's voice in her mind. Panicking never helped anyone. Annalise looked around. The car was about 15 feet away, its engine idling with a soft rumble. One of the kidnappers had already gotten inside, the other lingered nearby, finishing his cigarette. Her hands were free, they must have cut the ties when pulling her out of the car. Her hat was gone, maybe left behind in the car, maybe lost when they took off the bag. "Survive," a voice inside her whispered. "No matter what." Gathering every ounce of strength, moving as quietly as she could, Annalise slid off the stump and bolted toward the trees, away from the car. The snow crunched softly under her boots, but the sound was drowned out by the engine's hum. She managed maybe 10 meters before a shout split the air. "Hey! Stop!" She didn't look back. Annalise ran deeper into the woods. Her feet sank into the heavy snow, her breath came in ragged bursts, a sharp pain stabbing her side. She fell, scrambled up, and ran again. Behind her, angry voices, crunching snow, then a gunshot that made her heart stop. Fear gave her wings. She stumbled over roots buried in snow, kept running blindly, lungs burning like fire. Finally, exhausted, she collapsed under a thick bush, burrowing into the snow, trying to disappear. Minutes dragged on. Somewhere far off, she heard voices, the crack of branches, flashes of flashlight beams weaving between the trees. Annalise curled up tighter, clamped a hand over her mouth to hide the sound of her breathing. "Forget her," a voice carried through the cold air. "She won't survive out here anyway. We'll tell the boss she ran, let him think the wolves got her." "What if someone finds her? Who's gonna find her?" "It's winter. Blizzard'll cover the tracks. Nobody's coming this far into the woods. Let's go." The sounds faded. Annalise stayed still, afraid to believe she was safe. Only when the forest went completely silent did she dare peek out from her hiding place. No one. Just snow and trees. The cold bit through her clothes, sank deep into her bones. Her hands were numb, her legs stiff. She had to move to find shelter, but where? Annalise forced herself to stand. Her knees gave out, and she fell face first into the snow. Tears welled up. She thought of Mom. Of Uncle Kyle. Would she ever see them again? Don't give up, that voice whispered again. You're strong. You can do this. Mustering the last of her strength, she crawled to the nearest tree and leaned against the trunk. After resting a moment, she tried standing again, and this time, she managed. Swaying, she took a few steps. Then a few more. She didn't know how long she wandered through the forest. At some point, she began repeating Kyle's mantra under her breath, step by step. Just take the next step. Finally, when she couldn't go any farther, Annalise crawled under a wide, snow-covered bush and curled up tight, trying to stay warm. The cold was almost soothing now, pulling her gently toward a dark, quiet place, without fear, without pain. Her last thought before slipping into half-consciousness was, I'm sorry, Uncle Kyle. I tried. $60,000. Kyle wrote the number in his notebook, circled it, and stared at it blankly. Outside the window, day 3 of Annalise's disappearance was fading into night. 3 days with no sleep, running only on coffee and adrenaline. He sat in his home office, spreadsheets open, making lists, what he could sell, how much it would bring, where to get the rest. Mitchell Logistics, his pride, his creation, could sell for about $60,000. A quick sale. Practically a giveaway. Years of work, sleepless nights, risks, sacrifices, all reduced to a cold number on paper. The car, a used Volkswagen, wasn't worth much. His savings, $12,000, money he'd put aside for Annalise's education, for a rainy day. Well, the day had come. And it was darker than he'd ever imagined. That made $87,000 total. Still 23 short. Kyle rubbed his tired eyes. Loans. He could take out personal loans for $20,000 or $30,000. His credit was spotless. It wouldn't be a problem to get approved. But how would he pay them back? No business. No income. The terrifying truth bled through the numbers. Even if he raised the full amount, once he paid the ransom, he'd have nothing left. No home. No job. No savings. 2 people depending on him. Starting over from zero at 38. Was that even possible? But the alternative, losing Annalise, wasn't an option. She was the reason he got up every morning. The one who looked at him like he could do anything. The one who drew pictures of them holding hands. There was no choice. The phone buzzed. Kyle snatched it up so hard his knuckles turned white. Unknown number. Mitchell, he answered, forcing his voice to sound steady. How's the money coming along? That calm, businesslike voice again. The same one. I almost have it, Kyle lied. Just a few more days. You had 2 weeks from the first call. The man's tone sharpened. It's been 6. I know, damn it, Kyle snapped. Let me talk to Annalise. I need to know she's alive. A pause. That won't be possible. Kyle's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean, not possible? Where is she? Calm down, Mitchell, the voice said, still infuriatingly polite. The girl is simply unavailable right now. Focus on the money. We'll be in touch. The line went dead. Kyle squeezed the phone until the casing creaked. Unavailable. What did that mean? Unconscious? Or worse? No. No, they wouldn't kill her, not before getting paid. Unless something had gone wrong. He stood, his legs trembling, and walked out of the office. Down the hall, he stopped outside his sister's door and knocked softly. When there was no answer, he pushed it open. Jordan was sitting on the bed in the same position as yesterday and the day before. She hadn't eaten in 3 days, only drinking water when Kyle insisted. She looked thinner, paler, her face hollow, her skin the color of ash. "Jordan," Kyle said gently, sitting beside her. "You need to eat." She shook her head, eyes downcast. How could you even let her leave alone? The words slipped out before he could stop them. Jordan flinched like he'd struck her. Tears streamed down her face. "I'm sorry," Kyle said quickly. "It's not your fault. It was her fault. And his, for not noticing, not stopping it, not seeing the warning signs. But this wasn't the time for blame. This was the time to save Annalise." "Jordan, listen," he said, taking his sister's hand. "We'll have somewhere to live. Grandpa's house, in Riverbend. Remember? We went there as kids." Jordan lifted her dull, empty eyes. "Why?" "When this is over," Kyle said firmly, forcing his voice to stay steady, "we'll have to start over. I'm selling the business and the car. We'll lose the apartment. But we'll still have a roof over our heads, the old house. It's not fancy, but it'll give us time to rebuild." "In Riverbend?" For the first time in days, Jordan showed a flicker of interest. "But no one lives there." "Some people do," Kyle said, remembering Raven. "I'll drive there tomorrow to check on the place. I should also warn the girl who's staying there." "What girl?" Jordan frowned. Kyle hesitated. The whole story about Raven felt like it belonged to another lifetime. "Remember I told you, last summer, I got stuck in a hole in the woods, and a girl helped me out? An orphan. She'd run away from a foster home. I offered her a place to stay at Grandpa's house. I couldn't just leave her on the street." "You took in a runaway?" Jordan asked, her voice suddenly holding a trace of curiosity. "She's not a runaway," Kyle said quickly. "She just had a rough time. Like we all do. But now she'll have to make room. Family comes first." Jordan nodded absently. That brief spark in her eyes faded just as quickly. "I'll go to Riverbend tomorrow," Kyle decided. "Check the house, talk to her." He started toward the door but stopped when he heard his sister's quiet voice. "What if Annalise is already gone? What if they—" "Don't you dare." Kyle's shout came so sharp that Jordan flinched. "Don't even say that. She's alive. She's coming back. I'll do whatever it takes to bring her home." He left the room, closing the door gently behind him so it wouldn't slam. Then he leaned against the wall in the hallway. The anger drained out of him, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. He would find the money. He would bring Annalise back. And then they'd start again. Together. The morning of February 9th was clear and freezing. Overnight snow had blanketed Riverbend in soft white. Raven woke with the first crow of the rooster, lit the fire in the stove, and had breakfast, warm porridge with fresh milk from Ashley's goat. It was Friday, her selling day. Fridays were always busier on the highway, city folks heading out for the weekend. The perfect time to sell her knitted things. Raven opened her chest and pulled out her best piece, a blanket she'd spent a whole week working on. Blue and white threads intertwined in a pattern that looked like frost on glass. She hoped to get at least $80 for it, a fortune by her standards. Carefully folding the blanket into her old canvas bag, Raven threw on her coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and headed out. The February air bit at her cheeks, snow crunched under her boots. She followed the familiar path through the woods that led to Route 9, mentally running through her list for the day: sell her goods, pick up flour from old Mr. Massey, help Ashley chop wood, patch the hole in her sweater. When she reached the edge of the forest, she slowed down. Something felt off. Her usual spot, a small clearing near the roadside where she set up her stand, looked disturbed. The snow was trampled, tire tracks led off the road into the woods. And footprints, small ones, like a child's, mixed with large, heavy ones. Raven frowned. She knew these woods well, no one ever drove into the forest here. The road was too narrow, blocked by fallen branches. Something inside her whispered, "Go look. Maybe someone needs help." She remembered finding Kyle last summer, stuck and helpless. The world has a way of giving back kindness, her mother used to say. Leaving her plan to sell behind, Raven followed the tracks. They led about 100 meters into the forest before vanishing, probably covered by the night snowfall. She stopped, scanning her surroundings. The woods were silent except for the soft chirping of tits in the branches. Then something caught her eye, a spot of color against the white snow and dark trees. Something pink. Unnaturally pink for a winter forest. Raven hurried toward it, sinking knee-deep into the snow. Her heartbeat quickened, a strange, urgent feeling rising in her chest. Just beyond a juniper bush, she saw it, a jacket. A small pink jacket. And inside it, a child. A girl, maybe 9 years old, with curly blonde hair, curled up under the bush. Her face was pale, almost blue. Eyes closed. Dead? For one horrifying second, Raven froze. Then she rushed forward, dropped to her knees beside the girl, and touched her cheek with a trembling hand. Warm. Still breathing, though barely. Hey, wake up. Raven gently shook her shoulder. The girl moaned softly, her lashes fluttered. Slowly, her blue eyes opened, the color of a summer sky. For a few seconds, she stared blankly, then focused on Raven's face. Who are you? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm Raven. I live nearby. Raven spoke quickly, unwrapping her scarf and wrapping it around the girl. What's your name? What happened to you? Annalise, the pale lips whispered. Cold. Okay. Raven pulled the blanket from her bag and wrapped it tightly around her. Come on, we have to move. My house isn't far, it's warm there, and I've got a fire going. Annalise tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't hold her. She swayed, and Raven caught her, holding her close. I've got you. You just walk, I'll help you. Slowly, they made their way through the woods toward the village. Annalise could barely move, leaning all her weight on Raven. They stopped several times to rest. Raven rubbed her hands to warm them and kept talking, soothing, gentle words that didn't matter as much as the sound of her calm voice. The walk that normally took 15 minutes stretched into nearly an hour. When they finally reached the house, Annalise could barely stay upright. We're here, Raven said, helping her over the threshold. Inside, the air was warm, the fire she'd lit that morning still glowing in the fireplace. Raven sat Annalise down right in front of it, propped a pillow behind her, and quickly pulled off her wet jacket. She found one of her grandmother's old shawls and wrapped it around the girl's shoulders. You'll be warm soon, she murmured, tossing another log onto the fire. And then we'll have tea with honey. Ashley brought some yesterday, she's got her own bees, can you believe it? She kept talking, not so much for Annalise's sake as for her own, to drown out the fear creeping up inside. A child, alone in the woods, in winter. That can't be an accident. Setting the kettle on the stove, Raven kept rubbing the girl's hands, trying to bring them back to life. Slowly, the color returned to Annalise's cheeks, the ghostly pallor fading. Here, drink this, Raven said, handing her a mug of steaming tea sweetened with honey. Careful, it's hot. Annalise took a sip, then another. Her hands trembled, not from cold anymore, but from the leftover fear that was finally beginning to fade in the warmth and safety of the room. You live here alone? She asked softly, glancing around. Yes, Raven nodded. But my neighbor Ashley comes by a lot. No one bothers me, if that's what you mean. Annalise drank more tea. The color was returning to her face, her hands had stopped shaking. Then suddenly, her lips quivered, and she broke down. Loud, heart-wrenching sobs burst out of her, the kind only a child can cry. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her small shoulders shaking. Raven pulled her close, holding her the way her own mother once held her, tightly, safely, letting her cry it all out. She stroked her hair and whispered, "Shoo, it's okay. You're safe now." It was the cry of relief, of terror finally released, of everything she'd been holding in. Annalise cried until she ran out of strength. At last, sniffling, she pulled back and wiped her face on her sleeve. I'm sorry, she mumbled. I got your sweater dirty. It's fine, Raven smiled. Sweaters can be washed. What matters is you're alive. Can you tell me what happened? How did you end up in the woods? Annalise took a deep breath and began to tell her story, stumbling, jumping from one thing to another. About the woman who'd approached her outside the art school. The car. The bag over her head. The men talking about ransom and debt. The escape through the woods, the gunshot, hiding, running until she couldn't anymore. Raven listened, her heart tightening with fear and anger. Who could do something like this to a child? These weren't movie villains, these were real people. Real monsters. What about your parents? Raven asked gently when the story was over. Your mom, your dad, they must be looking for you. Dad's he's in prison. I've never met him, Annalise said quietly. And Mom, she was gambling. Owed money. That's why they took me. Raven stayed silent, letting the words sink in. Gambling debts. Kidnapping. This was serious, the kind of thing the police should be handling. Do you have anyone else? Family, she asked after a moment. Uncle Kyle. Annalise's face lit up for the first time. He takes care of us, me and Mom. He'll fix everything, I know it. He always does. Raven's heart skipped a beat. What's your uncle's last name? Mitchell, Annalise said. Kyle Mitchell. He owns his own company, deliveries, I think. Raven froze. Kyle. That Kyle. The man who had given her this house. The one she had saved that summer. Could it really be his niece lying here in front of her? This is Raven's voice trembled slightly. This is his house. Your uncle's house. He let me live here. Now it was Annalise's turn to stare, wide-eyed. You know Uncle Kyle? Yes, Raven nodded. I helped him once, in the woods. He got stuck, and I pulled him out. Then he helped me. He's a good man, Annalise. The best, the girl said instantly, her face brightening with the first real smile of the day. They looked at each other, two lives that had somehow crossed in the most impossible way. Coincidence? Fate? Something more? We have to call him, Raven said, standing up. We have to let him know you're here and safe. But then she stopped short. She didn't have a phone. Kyle had left his number on a note stuck to the fridge for emergencies, but she could only make a call from Ashley's place, and that would mean questions. Explaining. No. If she called the police, they'd find out she'd escaped the orphanage. They'd send her back to Mrs. Heitner. Maybe she could take Annalise to the nearest town, but then they'd get separated, questioned, dragged into the system. I think, Raven said slowly, returning to the fireplace, we should wait. You said the men gave your uncle 2 weeks, right? Then we have time. You're safe here now, warm, fed. Uncle Kyle will be looking for you. Annalise's eyes filled with worry. He must be so scared. I'm sure he's searching for you, Raven said softly. And maybe he'll come here. It's his house, after all. If he doesn't show up by tomorrow, we'll figure something else out. Okay? Annalise nodded, that small, trusting nod children give when they decide to believe an adult knows what to do. Though what kind of adult am I? Raven thought. Just a 12-year-old pretending to be one. You must be hungry, Raven said, changing the subject. I've got soup, potatoes, and honey for tea. I'm starving, Annalise admitted, and the simple, childish honesty of it made Raven laugh. She set the table, and they ate together. Slowly, the fear that had hung in the air began to lift, replaced by something warmer, gentler. Annalise told stories about her life in the city, about her art school, about the paintings she'd made, and about Uncle Kyle, who was more like a father than an uncle. Raven listened, asking questions now and then, sharing bits of her own life, carefully, avoiding anything about the orphanage, pretending to be just another girl living with a sick mother. By evening, they were completely at ease with each other. Annalise helped Raven cook dinner, laughed at how awkwardly she chopped wood, and showed her sketches from her notebook. Luckily, her backpack hadn't been taken by the kidnappers. "You know," Annalise said later, when they were sitting by the fireplace after dinner, "I really like you. You're like a big sister." "I've never had one." "Me neither," Raven said softly, warmth spreading through her chest. "Then let's be sisters," Annalise said with that pure, disarming sincerity only children have. "Deal?" Raven smiled and nodded. "Deal." Outside, snow was falling softly, covering the road, erasing the past, wrapping the world in silence. Inside the small house that had become a haven for two girls, the fire glowed warmly, filling the room with light and comfort. Two lost souls had found each other in the whirling snow, and neither wanted to lose the other. Two girls by the fire, two lives tangled by fate. One had lost her mother and been abandoned by her father. The other had almost lost herself in the chaos of adult problems. Both knew what fear felt like. Both knew what hope was. And outside, the snow kept falling, covering tracks, hiding secrets, as if winter itself wanted to protect them, to give them a break, a chance to begin again. February 11th dawned bright and clear. Sunlight reflected off the snow, creating the illusion of warmth, though the air was bitterly cold. Kyle's car crawled carefully along the snowy road toward Riverbend. Endless white fields stretched on both sides, broken only by dark patches of forest. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched so hard the muscles twitched in his cheeks. The past few days had blurred into one long nightmare: sleepless nights, endless phone calls, negotiations to sell his company, meetings with creditors. He had almost everything ready. 2 days left until the deadline. 2 days until they were supposed to return Annalise. If she was still alive. He pushed the thought away. He couldn't afford to let it take shape. Not now. He and Jordan needed every bit of strength just to keep going. Jordan sat beside him, staring out the window in silence. Pale, exhausted, she looked 10 years older than she had a week ago. Her lips moved soundlessly in prayer. She'd never been religious, but when the ground falls out from under you, you reach for anything that might keep you standing. "We're almost there," Kyle said finally, breaking the heavy silence. Jordan didn't answer, just gave a small nod without looking at him. The quiet between them was thick, full of unspoken guilt and pain. Kyle was done blaming her. She'd been punishing herself far more harshly than he ever could. But his compassion had also run dry. He'd forgiven too many times. Given too many chances. "I don't know what I'm going to say to Raven," he murmured. Jordan turned her head for the first time. "The girl? The one from the orphanage?" "Yeah," Kyle nodded. "How do you tell a kid you took in 6 months ago, 'Sorry, but my family comes first'? But I don't have a choice. We need that house, at least for now. What'll happen to her?" There was something like life in Jordan's voice again. "I don't know," Kyle admitted. "Maybe I can find her another place. I still have a few contacts left, even after selling the business. But I'm not sending her back to the orphanage. They treated her like garbage there." They fell silent again, each lost in thought. The road wound through snowy hills, carrying them closer to the place that was supposed to be their refuge once the nightmare was over. When they finally drove into Riverbend, Kyle noticed right away that something had changed. The little village, which had looked deserted in the summer, now seemed alive. Smoke curled from a few chimneys, the paths between houses had been cleared, and laundry hung on a line in one yard. Kyle stopped the car in front of his grandfather's old house. The snow around it was neatly shoveled, and ashes had been scattered along the path to the porch. Someone had clearly been taking care of the place. "Let's go," Kyle said, turning off the engine and looking at his sister. "It'll do you good to stretch your legs. And I think we both need to be here for this." Jordan nodded, pulling on her mittens. They stepped out of the car and made their way to the porch. Kyle knocked, firm, but polite. Silence. He knocked again, louder this time. Footsteps shuffled behind the door, but no one opened right away. "Raven?" Kyle called. "It's me, Kyle. Remember me?" The lock clicked, and the door opened slowly. Raven stood there, a little taller than he remembered, older somehow, but unmistakable. Her dark hair was braided, her gray eyes wary but calm. She wore a chunky knitted sweater, clearly her own handiwork. "Hello," she said softly. Kyle opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Behind Raven, he saw another figure, a little girl with blonde curls escaping a messy ponytail, blue eyes that struck him like lightning. Annalise. His heart stopped. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Beside him, Jordan made a strangled sound, half sob, half gasp. Annalise peeked out from behind Raven's shoulder, her face lighting up in sudden joy. "Uncle Kyle." "Mom," she cried. Jordan fell to her knees in the snow, arms outstretched, tears already streaming down her face. "Annalise." "Baby." Annalise ran to her, nearly knocking Raven off balance. In an instant, she was in her mother's arms. They clung to each other, both crying, holding so tightly it was as if they were afraid the world might pull them apart again. Kyle stood frozen. Reality seemed to split in two. Part of him couldn't believe this was really happening, while another part recorded every detail: Jordan's shaking shoulders, Annalise's face buried in her mother's neck, snow falling softly over them. He looked up at Raven. She was smiling, a mix of relief and quiet sadness. "I found her in the woods," she said softly, meeting his eyes. 3 days ago. She was freezing. I didn't know how to reach you." Kyle took a step forward, then another. He dropped to his knees beside his sister and niece, wrapping his arms around them both, holding them tight. The three of them cried together, no shame, no restraint, just raw, trembling love. Then Kyle stood and turned to Raven. He pulled her into a hug, strong and protective, the kind that says you're safe now. She stiffened for a moment, surprised, then melted into his arms. A sob escaped her, the first in months, as she finally let herself stop being brave and just be a child who needed someone to hold her. "Thank you," Kyle whispered, stroking her hair. "Thank you. You've saved my family twice now. You've saved me twice." The circle had closed. Last summer, she had pulled him out of a pit. Now, she had saved his niece from the cold trap of the winter forest. Coincidence? Or something bigger, a twist of fate tying their lives together for good? Inside, the house was warm and full of light. The stove crackled softly, filling the room with the scent of birch wood. Around the table, covered with a hand-knitted cloth, the four of them sat together, a family bound not by blood, but by everything that truly mattered. Annalise sat between her mother and uncle, leaning first against one, then the other, as if making sure they were real, that they were truly there. In front of them sat mugs of hot tea. Raven had brewed herbs she'd gathered in the fall, following Ashley's advice: mint, oregano, and St. John's wort. The scent filled the room, bringing back memories of Kyle's childhood, of this very house when his grandmother was still alive. "Tell us everything, sweetheart," Kyle said softly, wrapping his arm around Annalise's shoulders. "What happened? How did you end up here?" Annalise took a deep breath and began to tell her story. About the woman outside the art school. The car. The bag over her head. The men's voices talking about ransom, the fear, the desperate run through the forest. The gunshot. Jordan flinched at that, clutching her daughter even tighter. The hiding, the wandering through the snow until her strength ran out, the moment she gave up and fell asleep, thinking she'd never wake up again. "And then Raven came," Annalise said, her voice softening. "She found me, wrapped me in a blanket, brought me here. She gave me soup and tea with honey. We became like sisters. Right, Raven?" Raven smiled and nodded, but Kyle noticed the tension in her shoulders. She was afraid that this sudden happiness would end with her losing her home. Kyle's expression shifted as he listened, relief, anger, then cold determination. When Annalise finished, he took out his phone. "I'm calling the police," he said firmly. "This isn't just debt and threats anymore. This is kidnapping, this is." He glanced at the girls, unwilling to say aloud what those men probably had planned if Annalise hadn't escaped. While he dialed the number, Jordan held her daughter close, whispering apologies through her tears. Annalise stroked her mother's hair, trying to comfort her, a child consoling an adult, one of those small, painful inversions that feel wrong to the core. Police? Kyle straightened, his voice suddenly sharp and clear. My name is Kyle Mitchell. I'm reporting the kidnapping of a child. My niece, Annalise Mitchell, 9 years old. She was taken on February 6th. Yes, she's safe now, she's with us. No, we haven't taken her to the hospital yet, she's stable. He explained the situation briefly, leaving out the financial mess his sister had gotten into, but mentioning the casino, Fortune Palace, and its owner, Orlando Rubin. The officer on the other end immediately perked up at the name. Rubin, he repeated. Orlando Rubin, owner of Fortune Palace? Yes, said Kyle. You know him? We've been watching him for a while, the officer replied, his tone suddenly alert. But we didn't have enough evidence. Illegal gambling, extortion, threats, we knew all that. But kidnapping a child? That changes everything. Can the girl identify her abductors? Kyle looked at Annalise. She was listening intently, wide-eyed, and at the question, she nodded with quiet resolve. She can, Kyle confirmed. Good, the officer said, his tone now brisk with energy. Bring her in for identification as soon as possible. We're launching an operation immediately. And thank you for coming forward. Most people in your situation are too afraid. We'll be there in 3 hours, Kyle said, ending the call. Silence settled over the room. Jordan looked terrified, that ingrained fear of the police so common among those who've lived too close to the edge. Everything's going to be fine, Kyle said confidently. We're under the law's protection now. No one's ever going to threaten our family again. Jordan, stay here with Annalise, he added, standing. Raven and I need to talk. Alone. Raven tensed but obediently stood and threw a warm shawl over her shoulders. They stepped outside. The February air bit at their skin, the frost so sharp it stole their breath for a moment. Kyle closed the door behind them and turned to face her. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, whether from cold or instinct, he couldn't tell. The sunlight reflected off the snow, surrounding her in a soft, silvery glow, like something out of a winter fairy tale. Listen, Kyle began, choosing his words carefully. There's something I need to tell you. I came here today to say that I needed this house. Raven flinched but stayed silent, her jaw tightening. I was going to ask you to leave, he went on, not breaking eye contact. You see, I was selling everything, the business, the car, the furniture, to pay the ransom for Annalise. And after that, we'd have had nowhere to go. This was the only place left. I would have made sure you had money and another place to stay, but I needed the house for my family. He paused, watching her process his words. Her face stayed still, that orphanage-trained mask that hid everything. But her eyes betrayed her, gray and stormy, like the sky before a blizzard. I understand, she said quietly. Family comes first. Yes, Kyle nodded. But everything's changed now. You saved Annalise. You brought her back to me. And now, I won't have to sell anything. The police will take care of Rubin, they'll shut him down, cancel the debts. You didn't just save Annalise, Raven. You saved all of us. He paused, giving her a moment to take it in, then continued, softer now, but steady. Raven, I want to adopt you. Officially. You'll be part of our family. You'll have a home, a family, everything you've always deserved. Raven stared at him, eyes wide, unable to believe what she was hearing. It sounded too much like one of those dreams she used to have, the kind that hurt when you woke up. It's a long process, Kyle said. 6 months, maybe a year. But we'll get through it. Until then, you can stay here or come live with us, whatever you prefer. Raven slowly shook her head, not in refusal, but as if trying to shake off a dream. Do I have to go back to the orphanage? She whispered, and there was so much fear in her voice that Kyle felt an ache in his chest. No, he said firmly. I won't let that happen. I'll find a way. But I need your consent, Raven. Do you want to be part of our family? Raven stood there, looking at him through the tears gathering in her eyes. She had imagined this moment so many times, someone coming to take her from the orphanage, giving her a real home. But as the years passed, those dreams had faded, replaced by more practical ones: make it to 18, get state assistance, find a job, survive. And now, when hope had nearly died, life had handed her something she never dared to dream of: a family. A real home. People who would stay, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Yes, she breathed out, and the tears finally broke free, rolling down her cheeks. Yes, I do. Kyle stepped forward and hugged her tightly. Raven buried her face in his jacket and began to sob, for the first time in years, letting herself be just a child who needed someone's warmth, someone to hold her without judgment. They stood on the porch of the old house, the place where, 6 months earlier, a lonely girl's new life had begun. And now that life was finding new meaning, a family, belonging, an anchor in the stormy sea of existence. When they returned inside, their faces flushed from the cold and emotion, Jordan and Annalise were sitting by the fire. Annalise was talking animatedly, waving her hands, while her mother listened with a look of pure gratitude, as if every word her daughter spoke was a precious gift. "We're going to the police," Kyle announced. "We need to give a statement and identify the kidnappers." He hesitated for a moment, glancing at Raven before adding, "And one more thing. Raven's agreed to become part of our family. I'm going to start the adoption process." Annalise let out a squeal of joy and threw her arms around Raven. "Really? You're going to be my sister? For real? Forever?" Raven smiled through her tears and nodded. Jordan looked at her brother, questioning, but when their eyes met, she just gave a small, silent nod. She understood this wasn't up for debate. His mind was made up. When the first wave of emotion settled, Kyle pulled Raven aside, his tone turning serious. "There's one problem," he said. "They're going to find you eventually. Mrs. Heitner declared you dead, but officially, you are listed as missing. Once the truth comes out, there'll be questions. We need to handle this legally." Raven tensed, instinctively glancing toward the door, an old habit from years of needing an escape route. "I've thought it through," Kyle said, trying to reassure her. "We'll stage your official discovery. I'll say I found a girl hiding in my house and recognized her from the missing person report. I even found an old article about your disappearance online. I'll return you to the system, but at the same time, I'll file for guardianship, then adoption." "Back to the orphanage?" Raven's eyes widened in horror. "To Mrs. Heitner?" "Just for a little while," Kyle said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "A month at most. I'll visit every week. Annalise will write you letters. And then we'll bring you home, for good." Raven stayed silent, torn between two forces inside her, the fear of returning to that cold, cruel place and the hope of finally having a family, a future. "I'll be there for you," Kyle promised. "Every step of the way. You're not alone anymore, Raven. You have us now." She took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "All right," she whispered. "I agree." They packed quickly. Annalise didn't want to leave Raven's side, holding her hand and helping her gather her things. Jordan bustled around the kitchen, preparing food for the trip. Kyle called his lawyer, confirming the legal details. "Take this," Raven said, handing Annalise a small knitted bracelet with an intricate pattern of intertwined threads. "I made it for you. So you'll remember me until we see each other again." "We'll see each other soon," Annalise promised, hugging her tightly. "I'll be waiting. And I'll write to you every day." At last, everything was ready. Kyle helped Jordan and Annalise settle into the car, then turned to Raven, who stood on the porch. "I'll be back in 2 days," he said. "I'll take care of everything. For now, rest, and don't worry. Everything's going to be fine." Raven nodded, clutching her worn stuffed bunny, the only thing left from her mother, a silent witness to all her sorrows and rare moments of happiness. She watched as Kyle's car drove away, carrying the people who, in just a few short hours, had come to mean more to her than anyone else ever had. A strange feeling washed over her, a bittersweet mix of sadness and quiet joy, knowing this goodbye wasn't an ending, but the beginning of something new. Raven stood on the porch until the car disappeared around the bend. Then she went back inside, where the silence felt almost unfamiliar. She added more wood to the fire and sat beside it, watching the flames dance. For the first time in years, she had hope. Not a vague wish or a fragile illusion, but real, solid hope. And that alone was worth all the pain, all the tears, all the lonely years. The morning of February 14th was painted in cold shades of blue. The city was still asleep when several unmarked black police cars quietly pulled up to a 3-story building with a neon sign that read Fortune Palace. At this hour, the nightclub was nearly empty, only a few employees' cars stood in the lot. The operation lasted just 17 minutes. SWAT officers in black uniforms and masks moved in perfect sync, blocking all exits. A tactical team stormed the building. Shouts, the crash of breaking glass, the heavy thud of boots on marble floors, and then it was over. Orlando Rubin, the club's owner, and 4 of his men were led out in handcuffs. Rubin tried to appear calm, the kind of false composure that comes from believing you're untouchable. His well-groomed face and neatly trimmed beard betrayed no emotion. Only his eyes, dark and sharp, darted from side to side, calculating his next move. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said coolly as they pushed him into the police car. "My lawyers will handle it. I'll be home by tonight." But this time, even Orlando Rubin had miscalculated. The police seized everything: documents, illegal ledgers, lists of debtors, recordings of threats. They recovered the hard drives from the security system before anyone could destroy them. And most importantly, they had the testimony of 9-year-old Annalise Mitchell, who identified 2 of Rubin's men as her kidnappers. "It's them," Annalise said softly but firmly, pointing through the glass at the men in the lineup room. She gripped her uncle's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white, but her voice didn't shake. "The tall one was driving. The other one talked about leaving me in the woods." Kyle pulled his niece close, shielding her from the sight of those men. He didn't let go even when the detective handed him the report to sign. When they stepped outside, the cold February air felt sweeter than it ever had before. By evening, the news had spread through the whole city. Local headlines screamed, "9-year-old girl kidnapped over mother's gambling debts. Owner of illegal casino arrested. Child escapes kidnappers in dramatic flight through woods." The journalists, following child protection laws, didn't publish Jordan's full name, just her initials. But in a small town, rumors travel faster than news. Jordan could feel the stares when she walked to the store, the whispers behind her back. "That's the one who got her daughter kidnapped. She traded her kid for a roulette wheel. How does she even face people now?" Each word burned like acid. But she didn't lower her eyes anymore. She accepted the pain as something she had earned. "You don't have to read all that," Kyle told her one evening, finding her hunched over her laptop, eyes red from tears. "I have to," she whispered. "I need to remember what my weakness cost me." For the first time in years, Jordan looked her addiction in the face, without excuses, without denial. She found a therapist who specialized in gambling addiction and started private sessions. A week after Rubin's arrest, she walked into a small room at the city hospital, where a support group for gambling addicts was meeting. About 10 people sat in a loose circle of mismatched chairs, men and women, young and old, from all walks of life. Different stories, but the same pain. The same battle. Jordan sat down, clutching a paper cup of tea the volunteers had given her at the door. "We have a newcomer today," said the group leader, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and streaks of gray in his hair. "Would you like to introduce yourself?" Jordan stood up, knees trembling. 10 pairs of eyes were on her, but there was no judgment, no mockery. Only understanding. "Support. My name's Jordan. I'm 33, she said quietly but clearly. "And I am addicted to gambling." Saying it out loud felt like ripping open a wound, painful, but with a strange sense of relief that came from letting the poison out. A wave of sympathetic nods went around the room. These were people who understood. People who had been through it too. People she didn't have to hide from. "Welcome, Jordan," the leader said warmly. "The first step to recovery is admitting there's a problem. You've already done that." February 18th was sunny but cold. Kyle arrived in Riverbend early in the morning, while the village still slept under a blanket of white snow. His first stop was Ashley's house, small, tidy, with a light blue fence half buried in drifts. "Come in, dear," Ashley called cheerfully, as if she'd been expecting him. The kettle was already boiling. They sat together in her little kitchen, drinking strong tea with honey. Kyle told her everything about Annalise's kidnapping, her miraculous rescue, and his plans to adopt Raven. Ashley listened, nodding, occasionally crossing herself at the more harrowing parts of the story. "I suspected from the start that she'd run away from an orphanage," Ashley admitted when he finished. "You could see it in her eyes, that scared, cornered look. And the story about her sick mother? I knew it was made up. But she's a good child, hardworking. Always helping the old folks around here. And I'd never give her up. I grew up an orphan myself. I know what that's like." Kyle explained his plan, to bring Raven back into the system legally so he could later adopt her officially. "But for that to happen, someone has to find her," he said. "I thought of you, Ashley. If you call the police and say you saw a girl who looks like the one missing from the orphanage, it'll seem natural." Ashley gave him a long, thoughtful look. "You're not afraid they'll just take her back there and forget about her? Bureaucracy can drag on, and she'll be the one to suffer." "I am afraid," Kyle admitted. "But there's no other way. I can't keep her hidden forever. The truth would come out eventually, and that would be worse. This way, I'll file for guardianship immediately. I have a solid reputation, steady income, good references. It'll work out." Ashley sighed but finally nodded. "All right. I'll help." That same day, Raven packed up her few belongings, a stuffed bunny with one ear missing, a couple of books, and the knitted things she'd made herself. "You'll come back here," Kyle told her confidently as he helped her pack. "This will be your summer home. We'll have an apartment in the city too. You can decide where you want to stay." Raven nodded, holding back tears. She believed him, but the thought of returning to the orphanage froze her heart like ice. That evening, a police car arrived in Riverbend, a young officer and a woman from Child Services. Ashley played her part perfectly. She told them how she'd noticed a strange girl living in the Mitchell house, how the girl mentioned a sick mother no one had ever seen. "Then I saw her picture in the paper," Ashley said, shaking her head. "That's when I realized, it's the same girl who went missing 6 months ago. So I called you, just like I should." Raven stayed calm and distant, the way life in the orphanage had taught her, never show fear, never show hope. She didn't resist when the social worker led her to the car. She just glanced back at Kyle one last time. He gave her an encouraging nod, everything was going according to plan. Orphanage number 7 greeted Raven with silent hallways and that familiar smell, boiled cabbage, bleach, and a hint of something that always felt like sadness. The duty caregiver called the director on the internal phone. "Mrs. Heitner, it's Peterson." "She's back." "Yes, that one." Mrs. Heitner appeared 5 minutes later, neatly dressed in a dark navy suit, her hair pulled back tightly. Her face was unreadable, but Raven, who had learned to read this woman long ago, saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. The girl was alive. Which meant everything the director had done, halting the search, declaring her presumed dead, would be reviewed. There would be investigations, audits, maybe even dismissal. But Mrs. Heitner was a seasoned survivor. 20 years in this position had made her an expert in saving her own skin. In front of the social worker, she instantly switched tones. "Thank God you're safe," she exclaimed, feigning relief as she stepped forward and hugged Raven. Raven froze in the unexpected embrace, unsure what to do with her hands. In 5 years at the orphanage, Mrs. Heitner had never touched her, except to punish her. "We were so worried," the director continued, now speaking to the inspector. We searched everywhere, even called in divers. When they found her things by the river, she paused, as if reliving the moment. We all feared the worst. I see, the inspector said curtly, clearly unconvinced by the performance. We'll still conduct an internal review regarding her escape. The girl will have a medical check and a session with a psychologist. Please prepare the paperwork. When the door closed behind the inspector, Mrs. Heitner kept her concerned expression for a few seconds longer before abruptly stepping back. Go to your room, she said coldly. We'll deal with this tomorrow. Raven slowly climbed the familiar staircase, each step feeling like a descent into her past. The same walls, the same smells, the same sounds. It was as if nothing had changed in the 6 months she'd been gone. But something had. She had. Now she carried something no one could take from her, hope. On the second floor, she ran into Miss Lanter. The teacher froze for a moment, then rushed forward and hugged her, for real, with warmth. Raven, she whispered, her eyes glistening with tears. I knew it. I felt you were alive. For the first time that day, Raven allowed herself a smile. Amid all the coldness and pretense, this small spark of genuine care felt like sunlight. She hugged the teacher back, breathing in the familiar scent of mint candies Miss Lanter always kept in her pocket. You can't imagine how happy I am to see you, Miss Lanter said, wiping her eyes. Where have you been all this time? What happened? Raven hesitated, then decided to trust her. I was living in a village, in a man's house, a good man. He wants to adopt me. Miss Lanter's eyes widened, filling with surprise and joy. Really? That's wonderful. Who is he? When will it happen? His name is Kyle Mitchell, Raven replied. He said it'll be soon. We just have to finish the paperwork. Miss Lanter squeezed her hand tightly. I'll help however I can, sweetheart. Just hold on. Things will be different this time. February 22nd. Mrs. Heitner sat at her large desk, flipping through paperwork. Aside from the usual clutter of folders and reports, the only personal item in the office was a porcelain ballerina figurine. The night before, she had polished the glass frames of her diplomas and certificates until they gleamed. A knock on the door. Come in, she said sharply, then forced a smile as the visitor entered. Kyle Mitchell looked calmer and more confident than when they'd first met 4 days earlier, the day Raven had been brought back and identified by him using an old newspaper clipping. Today, he had come for another reason. Good afternoon, Mrs. Heitner, Kyle said, shaking her hand and taking a seat. I'm here on an important matter. He pulled a folder from his leather briefcase. I'd like to apply for legal guardianship of Raven Peterson, with the intention to adopt her, he said directly, meeting her eyes. Mrs. Heitner feigned surprise, though she'd already heard about this from both Raven and the inspector. That's quite a serious decision, she said, studying him. Are you sure you're ready to take responsibility for a difficult teenager? Absolutely, Kyle replied. I have parenting experience. My niece, Annalise, has lived with me for 8 years. We're a strong, close family. I can provide Raven with everything she needs, financially and emotionally. He handed her the folder. Here's all the necessary documentation for the first stage: proof of income, health certificate, employment reference, letters of recommendation, and my guardian application form. I assume the home inspection will come later. Mrs. Heitner accepted the papers, leafing through them casually, though inside she was relieved. If Raven was adopted, it would close every uncomfortable question about the search, the false death notice, everything. We found her a family. We did everything right. That's what she would say to any investigator. Of course, we'll process your application as a priority, she said with a polished professional smile. But the procedure takes time: committee reviews, inspections, paperwork. 3 or 4 months at least. Kyle nodded, playing along. I'm ready to wait as long as it takes. But I'd like to visit Raven every week, bring her books, help her with schoolwork. So she knows I won't change my mind. Of course, Mrs. Heitner replied smoothly. Mrs. Heitner tilted her head graciously. We fully support communication between prospective parents and children. It helps build the necessary emotional bond. She needed to appear caring before the upcoming inspection. Let them see that in orphanage number 7, children weren't just kept, they were guided, nurtured, and helped to find families. Then it's settled, Kyle said, standing up and extending his hand. I'll come every Saturday. And I'll stay in touch if there are any questions about the paperwork. Mrs. Heitner shook his hand firmly. I'm sure we'll work well together, she said with a practiced smile. That was probably the only honest thing she said during their entire conversation. March at the orphanage was always a special time. After a long, gray winter, the children seemed to come alive along with nature, louder, more restless, full of energy. Raven's room was filled with soft spring light streaming through lace curtains. She sat on the windowsill, knees pulled up to her chest, knitting something intricate from bright blue yarn. Again with your knitting, scoffed Debbie, her roommate. You're like a grandma. Raven just smiled. The teasing didn't bother her anymore, it felt so small compared to everything she'd survived. Knitting helped her pass the time while she waited. And the waiting seemed endless. The paperwork for guardianship was still under review, the inspections moving slowly. But Kyle had kept his promise. He came every Saturday, right at 2 o'clock, like clockwork. He brought books, the ones Raven asked for and others he thought she'd enjoy. He brought sweets she always shared with the other kids. He brought yarn of every color and texture. Raven had never seen such variety. And he always brought news from Annalise and Jordan. Annalise's letters were childish and full of warmth, decorated with doodles in the margins. Dear Raven, I can't wait until you come live with us. I already cleared a shelf for you in my closet. And there's space on my desk for your books too. We'll go to school together. I have a friend named Amy, she'll be your friend too. I already told her all about you. Jordan wrote as well. Her letters were more restrained, more mature, but just as sincere. Raven, I want to ask for your forgiveness. When Kyle first told me about you, I was cautious, afraid, really. Another child in our family meant another responsibility, another attachment, another chance to lose and hurt again. But now I know you're a gift. You saved my daughter, which means you saved me too. I can't wait for the day I can hug you. Those letters warmed Raven during the long nights when the nightmares returned. She still dreamed of her mother, drowning, reaching out, calling for help. But now, when she woke up trembling, she knew there was something to hold on to. A future waiting for her. Life at the orphanage had changed too. Mrs. Heitner no longer shouted at the children, she made an effort to act more composed. The inspections about Raven's disappearance were over, no violations found. Mrs. Heitner knew how to fill out paperwork properly and charm the right people. Still, whenever Raven passed by, the director couldn't help muttering with barely hidden envy. Lucky girl. Found herself a rich family. One day, Miss Lanter overheard that remark. Normally gentle and quiet, she turned to the director and said loud enough for everyone to hear. That girl deserves her happiness. She's been through more than you can imagine. Mrs. Heitner pressed her lips together but said nothing. Deep inside, in that small, buried part of her soul, something twisted uncomfortably. Because Miss Lanter was right. Raven truly did deserve happiness. An April evening wrapped the orphanage in soft twilight. Mrs. Heitner stayed late in her office, preparing reports for yet another committee review. But the words on the page blurred, the numbers refused to focus. Kyle Mitchell had been there again today. He brought Raven a book about knitting and spent a long time with her in the library, talking quietly. Mrs. Heitner had seen them through the glass door, both bent over the book. Raven's face lit up with a joy the director had never seen on any child in her care. Not once. She leaned back in her chair and rubbed her tired eyes. Her gaze fell on an old photograph in a frame on the shelf, slightly faded, one corner bent. It showed a young Mrs. Heitner with short hair, surrounded by children, her first graduating group, 1999. Her face was bright with enthusiasm, with belief in something good. She remembered that time. Back then, she truly believed she could change those children's lives. That every one of them deserved love and care. That the system, flawed as it was, still existed for their sake. When had that changed? When had she become what she was now, hardened, cynical, more concerned with inspections and paperwork than with the children themselves? Was it after the 10th child returned from an adoptive home with new scars? After the 100th adoption that fell through because the child was too difficult, not a good fit, or because the couple decided to have their own? Or was it when her superiors stopped seeing her as a person at all, just another cog in the machine? She flinched when something wet touched her cheek. Tears. She was crying. For the first time in years, tears ran freely down her face, smudging her carefully applied makeup. She tried to wipe them away, but they kept falling. Something inside her had broken, a dam holding back all her long-buried humanity had finally given way. Raven. That girl, with her strength, her hope, had reminded Mrs. Heitner of who she once wanted to be. Of the ideals and dreams that had been smothered by routine, disappointment, and the system itself. And that hurt more than anything. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out an old, worn notebook, her diary, abandoned more than 10 years ago. She flipped it open to a random page. 3 new arrivals today. Stacy has bruises all over, says she fell. Clearly her stepfather beat her. I'll make sure he loses custody, no matter what it takes. These kids deserve better. The lines, written in her own handwriting, felt like a message from another person. From the woman she used to be, the one who burned herself out fighting a losing battle against bureaucracy and human indifference. What have I become? She whispered into the empty room. After midnight, Mrs. Heitner quietly climbed to the 3rd floor, where the girls' dormitory was. The night caregiver looked startled. The director never came here after lights out. I'm just checking something, Mrs. Heitner said briskly, and the caregiver nodded nervously. The room where Raven slept was peaceful. 4 girls breathed softly in their beds. In the faint glow of the nightlight, Mrs. Heitner spotted the bed by the window. Raven lay curled up, clutching her worn stuffed bunny, the only link left to her late mother. Mrs. Heitner stood there, looking at the sleeping girl. How many nights had she cried herself to sleep within these walls? How many times had she gone to bed without hope? And now, because of one man's kindness, a stranger who'd shown more compassion than the whole system combined, she finally had a chance at a real family. Something stirred in the director's heart. She quietly walked up to the bed and gently pulled the blanket back over Raven's shoulder. The girl moved slightly in her sleep, mumbling something. Mrs. Heitner leaned closer to listen. Soon, Mom, Raven whispered. Soon I'll have a family. You'd be proud of me. Mrs. Heitner straightened up, feeling tears rising again. Moving carefully so as not to wake the girls, she slipped out of the room. In the hallway, she stopped by the window. Outside, the April landscape stretched under the soft moonlight. The last patches of snow were melting, revealing tender green shoots pushing through the ground. Spring. The season of renewal and hope, when even the hardest hearts began to thaw. Mrs. Heitner made a decision. She would do everything in her power to speed up Raven's adoption process, help with the paperwork, use her connections, whatever it took. Maybe, just maybe, she could recover a piece of the woman she used to be, the one who believed every child deserved happiness. Outside, the snow kept melting. And with it melted the last of the fears in the heart of the girl sleeping on a hard orphanage bed. Ahead lay summer. Ahead lay family. Ahead lay life. The June sun shimmered over the surface of Willow Creek, turning the water into living silver. Along the bank, thick with willow branches and wild grass, walked a man and a teenage girl. They didn't speak, but their silence wasn't heavy. It connected them, an invisible thread of quiet understanding. Raven recognized the place immediately, though she had avoided it for 5 years. Even when she'd faked her disappearance, she'd left her things by the shore but couldn't bring herself to approach the water. Now she stood on that same spot, the one that had split her life into before and after. The river flowed as always, indifferent to human pain. In its ripples, Raven imagined she heard echoes of laughter, her mother's voice, "Look, the water's warm." She slipped her hand into her jacket pocket, finding the worn stuffed bunny, the only witness to her long journey. She pulled it out, smoothed its faded fur, tracing the place where its second ear used to be. "I wanted to come here," she said softly, not to Kyle, but to the river, the sky, the memory itself. "I needed to say goodbye." Kyle stood a few steps away, giving her space but staying close enough to help if she needed him. He understood, some roads through grief can't be shortened or eased. You can only walk beside someone while they take them. Raven stepped closer to the water, still hugging the bunny to her chest. She stopped at the edge where the waves lapped at the sand. She lifted the toy to her face, as if speaking to it, but she was really talking to the woman who had given it to her on the last happy day of her childhood. "Mom." Her voice was quiet but steady, carrying the strength that only comes through pain. "I found a family. You wanted me to be happy. And now I can be. I'm letting go of the guilt. I'm sorry it took me so long." A breeze swept over the river, rippling the surface and stirring her hair. In that whisper of wind, she felt an answer, silent, but more real than words. She took off her sneakers, rolled up her jeans, and stepped into the water. The cold wrapped around her ankles, sending shivers up her body. Raven gasped, not in fear, but from the strange, almost sacred sensation. She stood still, feeling the sand shift beneath her feet, tiny fish brushing against her toes. Kyle tensed, ready to step in if she panicked. But she didn't. She breathed deeply and evenly, her expression calm, not terror, but wonder. It was as if she was rediscovering the element that had haunted her dreams for so long. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, a small, trembling smile touching her lips. "Not really." It was a small victory, but an important one. The first step toward reclaiming a part of herself lost with her mother that August day. The panic didn't come. The fear lingered somewhere deep, but it no longer ruled her. Raven stood for another minute before slowly stepping back onto the shore. Kyle handed her a towel he'd wisely brought along. She dried her feet, put her shoes back on, but didn't move right away. Turning toward the river one last time, she raised her hand in farewell. "Goodbye, Mom," she said with soft sadness, but without the despair that had always followed those words before. "I'm going to live. For you. For me." They walked away from the river, and with every step, her breathing grew easier. Kyle gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did great," he said simply. Raven nodded. She knew the journey wasn't over, the nightmares would come back, the fears wouldn't vanish overnight. But now she had something to fight them with, the knowledge that she wasn't alone. That there were people who needed her, who saw her not as a burden or a stray, but as part of their lives. She tightened her grip on the stuffed bunny. From now on, it wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a witness to her present. A good luck charm for the future. The Clay Haven Pottery Studio was on the ground floor of an old Victorian house downtown. Huge windows flooded the space with light that glimmered across the glossy surfaces of finished ceramics lining the shelves. The air smelled of clay, paint, and kiln-fired earth, a raw, creative scent that somehow felt grounding and ancient. Jordan stood at the pottery wheel, shaping a bowl from a lump of clay. Her hands, once unsteady and nervous, now moved with confidence. Her fingers guided the form gently, giving it symmetry and life. June 2024 had been a hot one, and the studio's air conditioner hummed steadily, but Jordan barely noticed. 3 months without relapse. 3 months of new beginnings. Every moment demanded focus, presence, purpose. She caught her reflection in the glass cabinet, her blonde hair tied in a practical bun, her blue eyes no longer clouded with fear, her cheeks touched with color. She looked alive. Real. For the first time in years. The doorbell jingled, guests had arrived for the workshop. Jordan smiled, wiped her hands on her apron, and went to greet them. "Welcome to Clay Haven. Today, we're making tea sets." The studio had started as therapy. Her psychologist, the one she'd seen after Annalise's kidnapping, had suggested finding something that required full concentration but allowed creativity. "Keep your hands busy, and your mind will heal," he'd said. Jordan had tried many things, knitting, like Raven, painting, like Annalise, but it was only when her fingers first touched clay that she'd felt it, that quiet certainty you get when you finally find your thing. At first, it was just a hobby. Jordan took lessons from a local ceramic artist and brought home wobbly little pots and vases that Kyle and Annalise always praised with careful diplomacy. But little by little, her hands grew steady, and her soul, peaceful. Then neighbors started asking if she'd sell her work. Friends asked her to teach their kids. And one day, a close friend offered her the ground floor of her house to open a studio. That's how Clay Haven was born, a small business that became Jordan's new purpose in life. After the workshop ended and the last student left, Jordan returned to her work table. On it was a neat stack of brochures titled Second Chance. The foundation she'd started with part of the studio's profits was still small, but already doing real work: support groups for people recovering from addiction, therapy sessions, job retraining courses. Everything that had once helped her was now becoming available to others. "How did it go?" Kyle's voice from the doorway made her jump slightly. "Great," she said, smiling as she took off her apron. "2 women signed up for regular classes, and one guy, Alex, he's really talented. I told him he should try making something to sell." Kyle walked further into the studio, looking over the new pieces displayed on the shelves. "This vase, it's yours?" he asked, pointing to a tall, deep blue vase with shades melting into turquoise. "Mine," Jordan nodded. "Do you like it?" "I love it," Kyle said honestly. "It's deep. Feels like there's an ocean inside it." Jordan laughed, freely, lightly. It was the kind of laughter Kyle hadn't heard from her in years, and to him, it was the best sign of her healing. They walked home together, as they did every evening. Jordan insisted on daily walks, another piece of advice from her therapist. They didn't talk much, but the silence was easy, comfortable. "You know," Jordan said finally, "for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. Not destroying but creating." Kyle looked at his sister. In the soft glow of the sunset, she seemed almost ethereal, and yet more real than ever. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. And he truly was. He was also learning to trust again, to stop hovering, to stop checking her phone or wallet, to let her make her own choices. It wasn't easy after years of trying to protect her from everything, but he saw it clearly now. Jordan was finally growing up. Becoming the person she could have always been, if not for the fear, the pain, and the addiction. And he was changing too. Learning that he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. Learning to trust life, or fate, or whatever it was that had led them to Raven that snowy day in the woods, and brought them together again through Annalise's kidnapping. Too many coincidences to be coincidence. Up ahead, on the playground, he spotted Raven and Annalise. They were swinging, competing to see who could go higher, laughing so hard their voices filled the air. 2 girls, almost sisters, and already, in their faces, you could see traces of the strong women they'd one day become. "They're beautiful," Jordan said quietly, following his gaze. Kyle nodded. "Yeah, they are. And maybe everything that happened, all the pain, all the chaos, was leading to this moment. To this family. Pieced together from broken lives, but whole again." 1 year later. June 2025. Riverbend was wrapped in blossoms. The apple orchards surrounding the village had turned into clouds of white and pink, filling the air with a sweet, delicate fragrance. Bees hummed busily from flower to flower, gathering nectar that would soon become honey on Ashley's table. 13-year-old Raven, in a light summer dress and with a braid down her back, stood by the window, gazing at the familiar landscape. The year had flown by like a single day, filled with classes at her new school, knitting club meetings at Jordan's studio, and new friends. The nightmares had mostly faded, now they came only once a month, sometimes less. She still saw her therapist, still worked through her trauma, learning to accept her past without letting it define her. "Raven, come swimming." Annalise burst into the room like a whirlwind. 10 years old, with messy blonde curls and endless energy, she radiated pure joy. In her hands, she carried a folder full of drawings. "What's that?" Raven asked, pointing at it. My project for the school exhibition, Annalise said proudly. A family portrait. She opened the folder to reveal a large sheet of paper painted in bright colors, a family picture. Uncle Kyle, Mom, Annalise, and Raven. 4 of them. Together. At their feet sat Charlie, the miniature pincher, a true and loyal member of their little clan. It's beautiful, Raven said sincerely, studying the drawing. The details were surprisingly vivid for a 10-year-old, Kyle's half-shy, proud smile, Jordan's thoughtful eyes, the sparkle in Annalise's own, and Raven herself, straight-backed, with a faint, knowing smile, like someone who held a secret she'd learned the hard way. My teacher asked why I didn't draw my dad, Annalise said as she slipped the drawing back into the folder. I told her my dad died. But I have an uncle. And he's better than any dad. Raven pulled her into a hug. No more words were needed. They understood each other perfectly, 2 girls who had lost parents but found something even greater, a family. Come on, let's go swimming. Annalise had already forgotten the serious talk, that was her nature. Never dwell on sadness. Keep moving. Celebrate life. Let's go, Raven said, smiling. They ran out of the house hand in hand, both in swimsuits under light sundresses, towels slung over their shoulders. They dashed past Kyle and Jordan, who were sitting on the porch. We're going to the river. Annalise shouted. Be careful. Jordan called after them. The path to the river was as familiar as the lines on their palms, every bump, every turn. They ran, chasing and laughing, their voices echoing through the warm summer air. At the shore, Annalise immediately tossed off her sundress and dove into the water, sending up a splash of sparkling spray. Raven was more cautious. She walked in slowly, feeling the cool water wrap around her ankles, her knees, her thighs. The fear was still there somewhere deep inside, but now she knew how to face it. She and Annalise had learned to swim together that spring, taking lessons at the pool, where a patient coach had helped Raven overcome her fear of water. Now, stepping into the same river that had once taken her mother, she felt not terror but peace. She understood now, the water had never been her enemy. It was simply there when tragedy struck, just like the ground beneath her and the air around her. The elements weren't good or bad. They just were. She dove after Annalise, letting the water hold her, lift her. They swam, splashed, laughed, just 2 kids enjoying their summer vacation. To anyone watching, they were ordinary girls. No one would have guessed the weight of the stories they carried. Kyle and Jordan sat on the porch, watching the girls disappear into the distance. 2 mugs of tea rested on the small table between them, next to a plate of Ashley's homemade cookies. I can't believe it's been a whole year, Jordan said softly. It feels like yesterday, Kyle nodded. The year had changed them all. Jordan, 1 year clean. Her foundation, Second Chance, had already helped 50 people begin their recovery journey. She knew it would always be a lifelong battle. Addiction never vanished completely, it only retreated, waiting for a weak moment. But now Jordan had anchors, her daughter, her brother, her niece. Her studio, her foundation, her new friends from the support group. She had something to hold on to. Kyle's thoughts rarely drifted back to those dark days anymore. Mitchell Logistics had recovered after the investigation, the company's reputation had taken a hit, but justice had been done. Orlando Rubin and his accomplices were serving real sentences. Kyle had even given a few interviews about illegal gambling and addiction recovery. Thank you, Jordan said suddenly. For what? Kyle turned to her, surprised. For not giving up. She took a sip of tea, her gaze following the path the girls had taken. Not on me. Not on yourself. For giving us all a second chance. Kyle smiled, shaking his head. It wasn't me. It was Raven who gave us that second chance. That little girl turned out to be stronger than all of us. He meant it. Raven, with her quiet strength and resilience, had become their example, their teacher. These adults, with all their experience and scars, had learned courage and hope from a child. In the distance came the sound of laughter. The girls were running back from the river, dripping wet and glowing with happiness, their hair tangled and wild. Raven slowed halfway home, her eyes on the porch where Kyle and Jordan sat, on the house that had become her home, on Annalise, who had turned back, wondering why her sister had stopped. In that moment, Raven thought of her mother, the one who had wanted nothing more than her happiness. She thought of the long road it had taken to get here, the fears she had faced, the love she had found. Time seemed to stand still, stretching out into forever. Then Raven smiled and ran toward the house, toward her family. She climbed onto the porch and sat between Kyle and Jordan. Annalise plopped down beside her, pressing close. Charlie, their little pincher, darted out from behind the house, barking for attention. They laughed, all four of them, the kind of laughter that fills the air with something so alive, so joyful, it feels almost sacred. Raven tilted her face up to the sky. The June sun warmed her skin, a soft breeze rustled through the apple trees, and somewhere far away, a bird was singing. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered, knowing no one would hear. "For my life. For my strength. For teaching me never to give up." Her daughter was safe. Her daughter was loved. Her daughter was happy. The ripples from that long-ago tragedy were still spreading across time, wider and softer, fading into calm. And at their center, there was no pain, no fear, no despair. There was life, continuing despite everything. There was love, strong enough to heal even the deepest wounds. There was family, found after years of loss and searching. Home is where the heart is. And Raven's heart had finally found its home. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need it today, someone who's waiting to believe that after the darkest night, there is always a sunrise. Because family isn't only those we're born to, it's also the people we choose with our hearts. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like. Your support gives us the strength and inspiration to keep creating stories that reach the heart. And, of course, subscribe to our channel for more stories about people, their struggles and triumphs, about love that heals, and hope that never fades. With warmth and gratitude for being here.